So in this video, I'll be going over Blender's user interface, covering the properties panel, outliner, and 3D viewport. So once you install Blender, this is the first thing you'll be seeing. This is called the splash screen. So this is Blender's. So for every Blender version, you have different splash screens. You don't really have to worry yourself about this. Just click outside of the box, and well, welcome to Blender. Officially, this is your first time in this application, and well, do not get overwhelmed. I know there's a lot happening. There's different modes, there's different things you do not know about, different circles. God, it's so overwhelming. It can get overwhelming, but don't be, because Blender is a 3D creation suite, and to put it simply, it's a software that can do almost anything from start to finish. You don't really have softwares like that that can do everything. They mostly specialize, but Blender can animate, sculpt, texture, literally almost anything. So that's why you have a lot of these tools. But yet again, I should give a disclaimer. Even though, let's say Blender has 100 tools, right, you only be using about 30-20% of those tools constantly for almost all your projects. So don't worry yourself. I would show you the ropes of the major basic tools you need to make anything, literally anything in Blender. So just to get in, when you open Blender, the first thing you'll be seeing is your 3D viewport. Now, your 3D viewport is where you'll be spending 90% of your time. It's literally your eyes, it's literally your window into the 3D world, to put it simply. It is very important, and you can't really do anything without it. This is where you'd be doing everything from animating, texturing, modeling, rigging. This is where you'll be seeing everything happen. Maybe except from texturing, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, if you notice, once I select each of these objects, it highlights, it has an orange highlight. So just to keep that in mind, once you select or once you click on these objects, you have an outline, an orange outline on it, which indicates that the object is selected. Just to quickly, so that I can see it's showing, so that I could see my whatever button I'm pressing. Just keep your eyes here. If you're a PC user, you'd most likely see my buttons, or you see my shortcuts. So just keep that in mind. As you can see, I pressed N to retract the toolbar. Let's go over this side of Blender. So this is your file, basically. This is where you open your project. This is where, let's say you recover your file crashed or something. This is where you recover. You come to autosave, and you can do last session or just check for it manually. This is where you save. This is where you save as a copy. We'll get into link and append some other time. It's a bit advanced, so don't worry yourself about this. This is where you import different objects. This too is a little bit advanced. As you can see, if you're familiar with 3D, you would know most of these formats. But if you're not, don't worry yourself. Eventually we might get into this different formats. This is where you export. Now, to be clear, this is not how you export or render out your file. So if you want to take a picture of this, you want to render out a picture of this, you don't do it this way. I'll show you how to do that later on. But this is how you export your objects. For instance, if you want to export this object, you come to File, Export, and this is where you export your object as a file, as a format you want. We'll get into this later on in the course, so don't worry yourself. Also, this external data, all this, don't worry yourself. This default is, for instance, if I quickly delete this, and let's say in my Blender file, when I open Blender, I don't want to see it as what do you call it? I don't want to see the default cube. So you can see, okay, Blender, save this as my startup file. So as opposed to having your default cube here, you would tell Blender, whenever I open up Blender, I don't want to see the default cube. So just quickly go over this. In edits, that's explanatory. You can undo, redo. There are shortcuts for this. This is your undo history. It just shows everything you've done. For instance, you can see select, delete, select, toggle edit mode. These are all what I've done since I've opened Blender. So you basically see everything you've done. This is where you search for anything in Blender. We'll get into how you use that later too. This is where you rename an active item, so you can rename this. If we should quickly do this, so this is the name of this is cube, so I can say Jessimel, and you can see that its name is now Jessimel. So yes, the batch name, you can batch rename rather, so I can select all of this and say, oh, I want to rename it to Blender or something. Lock objects onto modes. This is a bit different and a bit complicated. We'll get into that. We get into object modes. We've not gotten into that, so I don't want to really explain this now. These are just your preferences. This is where you enable your add-ons. This is where you change your viewports, settings, and all of that. You can also get into this a little bit later. This is where you change your render settings and all of that. Not render settings, your GPU render settings. It's a bit complicated. We get into that a little bit later. These are all settings you don't really need to get into now. As you learn Blender, you know their purpose eventually. So remember I mentioned exporting or rendering. Let's say if I want to take a picture of this entire thing, you don't export like a normal application. This is going to export your objects. You render. So in Blender we call it rendering, not exporting. So we can say render image. We'll get into rendering a little bit later, not to overwhelm you, but yeah. So this is window. You can create a new window, and this is basically another Blender window. You can have this in your second monitor, because I have two monitors here. If you have two monitors, you can have this in your second monitor. If you're animating, doing anything basically, and you need more windows. Let me see, new main toggle window full, so you can put your Blender in a full screen mode. That's self-explanatory. You can show status bar. This is your status bar, I believe. If I should quickly, yeah, that is your status bar. This section here is your status bar. You can get to that later, so you can see screenshots, toggle system console, all this. This is a help. So this is your manual. So yeah, this is just the basics of this side of Blender. I'm not going to get into object modes now. I just want to get into the UI, right? So if you notice, you'd see different modes now, or rather different windows now. Don't get overwhelmed. I keep saying this. These are just different modes. They give you a cohesive space to do certain tasks, right? So for instance, if I want to model, it takes me into a different mode. We're going to get into modes a little bit. If I want to sculpt, it takes me to the sculpt mode. If I want to UV edit, it opens this menu for me, and then I can UV edit. I don't want to really get into this, so you don't get to too overwhelmed. But just know that these are just different 3D viewport styles. So I'm very sure if you've edited, you know, in Premiere Pro you have different work windows and how it's arranged to best optimize for a task. So all these windows are optimized for a certain task that we'll get into subsequently. So yeah, I'm not going to get into this now. This as well, I just want to go over the UI. Yeah, these are your different viewport shading modes. So as you can see, it's a bit boring over here, right? It's just everything is gray and all of that. But if you want to view your cube, for instance, in a different mode, what you can do is you can click on viewport shading. Now viewport shading is going to show you just the texture of or the color of your cube. Now our cube is just gray, and that's what it's going to represent. Now if you want Blender to calculate the lighting in the scene, for instance, this is a light, I believe, is it a point light? I think it's a point light. So if we go into the viewport shading, as you can see, it shows rendered. So this shows you your rendered image. It shows you everything. It calculates the lights, it calculates the textures and the world. Just to simply put it, if I go here, you can see that we have some lighting. So let's get into other parts of your UI. We'll come back to this a little bit later. So this is your outliner basically. And what's your outline panel? This is where everything is stored, is shown in your scene. For instance, as you can see, camera, this is the camera, lights, this is the lights, cube, this is the cube. So essentially, if I should put it in simpler terms, it is your 3D scene made in a 2D paper sheet or a 2D plain sheet. So written down, okay, this is what I have in my scene. So you just keeps things organized, it keeps things simple for the person. Okay, I can't find a certain thing, I know if I come here I'll find it. And if you're wondering what this collection is, a collection basically is where you put in objects to store them. So imagine a box, a cardboard box. You put in objects into them to keep things organized. Sometimes you label them books, sometimes you label them clothes or whatever, and then you keep that item, the type of item in that box. So that is your collection. It's mostly used for organization, but you can use it for other things that we'll get into later. And now this is the properties panel. Just below the outline is the properties panel. Now this is where you control your settings basically. You spend about 10% of your time here because you control a lot of settings. You control your material settings, lighting, even rendering. Here you can see we have a render panel, right? You control your export settings. For instance, the resolution 1920 by 1080 is what is default. You check, you can mess with your formats. For instance, I want to export as JPEG or a video. This is for Blender, this is the video format. You can change your, this is also a little bit complicated, we'll get into that later. You can change the color of your world. So if I quickly go to render and I take this down, you can see that our world is now black, because this is where we're controlling the settings of our world. We can even change this color to, if I should do Ctrl Z, can change this world to, let's make it pink, or yeah, let's make it pink. So we change it to pink. We can mess, this is where we just mess with the settings. These are the numbers basically of your visual representation, if I should put it like that. This is your collection settings, we'll get into that later. These are your object settings. So as you can see, we're going to get into navigation after this, but just to quickly go over a little bit of navigation. As you can see, what we have selected is what is going to be represented in our properties panel. Just like I mentioned, it is your numeric depiction of your visual representation, if that makes sense. So if I select camera, you can see that this has been changed to camera, and these are the numbers, and this is the values that for instance, the location of our camera in 3D space, rotation as well, the scale as well. Same thing for the lights. As you can see, these have different settings because they are not in the center, they've been moved, so they've been offset. If I quickly select my cube is at the center of my 3D world. And just to quickly go over that, if you see where this, if I delete this cube, if you see where this, not the red and white circle, but where these lines intersect is the middle of your 3D world. So if I go to add, mesh, and cube, you see that it comes to our the center of our world, right? So just know that the center of your world is where the lines intersect. The red and yellow line, that's the center of your world. Now I'm going to go into what I just did now just a bit, but let me finish with the panel. So if I, for instance, move my object to the left or to the right, as you can see, now we're in render mode. Let's go back to viewport shading. So from this panel, I can move my object to the left anywhere I want to. So this is a numerical representation of what's happening in our 3D space, and we can control our object's properties, location, rotation from here. As you can see, we can rotate it over here. As you can see, we can scale it in one direction over here. We can scale it we're scaling it in the z-axis and the y-axis. Just a quick note, your z-axis is the red line, your y-axis is the green line. and your z-axis is the blue line. So yeah, we've come to the end of this lesson. How about you open up Blender again, look at the viewports, check the properties panel, just everything we've done in this video. In the next lesson, we'll be going over navigation tools, basically how to navigate in your viewports.